Greetings one and all to the Nightmare Riders Metal Impressions. It's no secret that I adore heavy metal music. I do a radio show on Anime League forums every Friday 8 to 10 PM GMT, dedicated to giving my listeners a brief taste of how diverse the genre of heavy metal is. It's not all blast beating drums, hypersonic distorted guitars and guttural vocals that Happy Viking lovingly described as sounding like the Cookie Monster's sex tape. No, heavy metal is many different styles within the same genre, all with the same basic elements but used in very different ways. And so, each week I intend to give everyone my impressions of 3 metal albums I have recently been listening to, providing a short critique as well as a recommendation to who should listen to each album. New albums will always take priority, although I occasionally may dip into my all-time favourites to show what makes them so amazing. While I have my favourite subgenres, I will try my best to keep it varied and have each of the 3 albums being of a different subgenre to one another. So without further ado, let's get started. First up, it's Exmortus with the new album for 2014, Slave to the Sword. This is a technical thrash / melodic death metal crossover which nicely blends elements of both. One thing that turns me off a lot of thrash metal bands is that they are too straightforward. The nature of thrash metal means that they must be played at high speed to give the full intensity of it. This means that chord progression is often sacrificed and it becomes quite boring. My favourite thrash metal bands, being Overkill, Anthrax and Evil, all managed to add some clear riffs or groove metal influences onto their music to give more hooks to each song and distinguish them better. Or, like Gamma Bomb and Tankard, the lyrics are just so utterly ridiculous it's hard not to enjoy them. The blend of melodic death and technical thrash manages to avoid the problem altogether when it comes to Exmortus, as the rhythm of each song isn't nearly as straightforward as you'd expect. The amount of chords being switched while still keeping a firm melody to a lot of the songs, with the title track being a prime example of this, is really impressive, making you pay attention to the song without making it too overly chaotic. The solos have a great energy to them, but honestly the bridge and pre-chorus to many of the songs is where the catchiest parts usually can be heard. Thrash metal tends to normally be clean and shouty vocals or high-pitched raspy vocals, but Jadran Conan Gonzalez goes for a more melodeath style growls, deeper and clearly harsh, but still very clear in production to make it intelligible. The production of the whole album is very clean and clear, which isn't something you usually hear or notice on professional albums, as often the idea is to create a big wall of sound. Overall, I really enjoyed Slave to the Sword and would recommend it to fans of Monomark and Exodus. More accessible than the average thrash metal album, but perhaps not ideal band to get people started on extreme music. Next up is the new Grand Magus album to 2014, Triumph and Power. Now this is what I was really looking for in a Grand Magus album. Grand Magus are a mix of traditional and doom metal, in both of these elements varying in prominence between the albums. I was introduced to Grand Magus when buying the album Hammer of the North on a whim and was completely engrossed. It's nothing new for metal bands to sing about Vikings. Half of the folk metal bands and some of the melodeath bands I listen to are about Vikings, although rarely do we get something that's more subdued. Hammer of the North had a slow-paced, down-tuned riffs that are typical for doom metal, but still keep the energy and powerful vocals that I would expect from traditional metal. The previous album, entitled The Hump, didn't really grab my attention very much, aside from a couple of songs, so I was ready to overlook the new efforts from Grand Magus. Oh boy, how glad I am that I didn't. The influences from one of my favourite bands of all time, Manowar, are clearly showing here beyond a shadow of a doubt. The pacing is still on the slower side, and the doom elements aren't completely gone, but they are significantly reduced. The traditional metal marching riffs are complemented with power metal inspired lyrics, with song titles such as Steel vs. Steel, Triumph and Power, and Dominator, all centered around inspiring bloody battles of Vikings, which is really cheesy while still being very heavy and satisfyingly energetic to listen to. Grand Magus is a band that is constantly evolving with their music for each album, never straying too far away from what made them good to begin with, while not getting too repetitive with their basic style either. If you prefer more serious, down-to-earth lyrics and cheesy battle songs, this isn't the album for you. However, I still recommend this album to anyone with the slightest appreciation for bands like Saxon, Manowar, and even epic doom metal bands like Candlemass. It is very accessible and very uplifting. Finally today, let's talk about the new album by Freedom Call, entitled simply Beyond. Freedom Core were one of the very first power metal bands I ever got interested in, being of a similar musical quality to Dragon Force, Power Quest and even Manowar, who I mentioned before. However, their previous album, Land of the Crimson Dawn, while not being a bad album, was fairly lackluster. The best part about Freedom Core has always been their thick, epic sound with fast guitar work, inspiring drum beats, strong keyboard melodies and choir-like vocal mixing for the chorus of each song. Land of the Crimson Dawn felt like it wasn't nearly as solid with the melodies and was more simplifying the music, which didn't really fit with the inspiring power metal style of Freedom Core. The first single and opening song of the new album did not fill me with much hope. It felt like a big rehash of the older song from the Circle of Life album entitled Carry On. Union of the Strong felt like it cut the lyrics from Carry On in half, mashed them together, cut down the melody and lead guitar, and had almost no keyboards, making it feel altogether like a half-assed effort. I am so glad I listened to the whole album though, because if I had let one song dictate to my opinions of the entire album, I would have missed a ton of amazing songs on here. Knights of Tarragon pretty much fixed all the complaints I had before. The guitars felt considerably more full, the keyboard intro brought back the amazing melodies that Freedom Core do best, and the vocals felt full of life and so uplifting, it honestly made me wonder why I ever doubted Freedom Core to begin with. Sure, there are one or two dud songs on the album, but the vast majority of it gives us something that feels fresh and new, while still paying homage to the classic anthems that made them amazing to begin with. A big reason I listen to power metal is because of how happy and uplifting it is, helping me through the dark times when I feel depression taking over. The 7-minute title track did an amazing job of that all by itself. As before, if you want a super dark and super serious lyrics, and maybe even a huge wall of sound like you get with something like Legion of the Damned, you're not going to get that here. But if you just like simple power metal in the vein of Dragon Force and Power Quest with keyboards becoming a prominent focus, and I highly recommend this album to you. So there you go, 3 amazing albums that are all worth a listen to. If you have an album that you'd like to hear my opinions on, leave it in the comments below. Until the next time, stay true my metal warriors.